Welcome you all to Trek Wars. Welcome you all back to Trek Wars. So, Dominion War Aftermath 2. So what I'd like to do with this video is I have been reading your guys' comments and then analyzing some of the things that you guys in the community have told me. And you know what? I think some of you guys made some really good points, and I want to share them with everyone. So first off, when I was talking about the Saber class, and a lot of people were saying that they don't think that my idea of building the Saber class as the first production ship, because my idea is that it was small enough, it was cheap enough, you know, it wouldn't take that much time to build it, and it's effective enough that it could do a role of transporting goods and then defense. And then a lot of people were pointing this out to me, and so I went to review this, that they're saying that they agree with the defensive capabilities, but they were saying that that ship is pretty small and its cargo space is pretty limited. And so I went to investigate this and find out if you guys are correct or not. Alright, so let's take a look and let's see what we got here. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right, 7, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. 4. So we got 7 by 4. So yeah, it's got a pretty decent amount of cargo space. But let's compare it to the Miranda, its replacement. Okay, so obviously the cargo space is right here in the middle. Let's zoom in and let's take a look at it. Okay, so you can see it's 3 by 2, but you also can take into consideration that the ship is pretty wide, so you know it's a little bit deceptive, but the cargo space is probably a little bit better on the Saber, but not by much. Once you realize how wide the Miranda is, and then you take in consideration how deep the Saber is, and we compare the both of them, let's do that. So when we look at a top view, we can see that, you know, in actuality, the Miranda probably is not carrying as much cargo as the Saber is. The Saber is just that much bigger, and you know, there's just not that much space on the Miranda. So let's now look at what people were telling me, what the suggestion was. They were saying, well, why don't we just go to the next level class of ship, and let's just go with the Steam Runner. I've seen people say the Steam Runner is this replacement, you know, and we'll take a look. Okay, so after reviewing the Steam Runner is a much larger ship. It's got a lot more volume, and it obviously can carry more cargo than the other two. But what really gets you is when you look at the specifications, and I really didn't know this, is that the Saber class has a very large hangar base. I wasn't really aware of this. I'll be honest with you. I never really paid that much attention or thought too much about the Saber class. So I started reading up on it. I started researching it after you guys told me about it. And this is a much better choice. And I'll show you exactly why. Alright, so when you look at the blueprints of this ship, you'll see that in the front, there is a very large hangar deck. I didn't know it had such a huge hangar deck. It would be very easy to convert the hangar into storage. No problem at all. Even if you only converted like one of its 2 hangars to storage, it's still carrying way more than, you know, my Saber could do. Even its normal storage capacity would be better than the Saber. Now this ship is big. It is more resource intensive, but it does everything the Saber can do, but better. You know, its armament is better. Its armor. The Saber is partially armored with, you know, abrasive armor. This ship is completely armored with abrasive armor. This is a very strong ship, and that's honestly kind of the reason why I didn't really think about this ship, because I was like, okay, I didn't know about the big giant cargo space, you know, hangar bay, but I didn't even consider it because of the time and resources it would take to build something like this because of all the abrasive armor. Because the more abrasive armor it is, the more, like, I guess, intensive it would be on resources. But I think that overall this would be a great choice. So, you know, it's got similar speed, it's a new generation, and there's really nothing that's going to be able to take this thing on 101, because the Steam Runner it doesn't really have that many weapon ports, but it's got so much armor, it's got so much shielding that really nothing's going to be able to take it down, really. I mean, unless it was an actual warship going after it. There's no way pirates or anything of that nature are going to be able to take this ship on. So I can see definitely some merits in it. Like I said, the only thing that makes me kind of hesitant about this is when we think about time and price, because price doesn't really exist, you know, in the Star Trek universe. So when you say price and time, you're talking about those things. You're talking about the time it's going to take to build, and the cost is going to be the time itself and then the resources. So abrasive armor is very hard to produce, and it's not something that's just there. So building these ships is time consuming. So you would have it would take longer than normal to build a ship like this just because of the resource situation. So you could obviously build other ships faster than you could build the Steam Runner. So that is thing to take in consideration. But if you were to think about it, you know, overall, it would be better for the long run to actually replace some of the sabers and then use Steam Runners. So I would not, after reviewing this, completely take away my sabers, because sabers are so much easier to build than Steam Runners. But I don't think I would mass produce after researching what you guys have shown me. I see the merits in what you guys had said, and I do agree I shouldn't just build sabers, because honestly, they don't hold that much cargo. And the Steam Runner can do a much better job when it comes from a cargo perspective. So if you're going for those deep runs, I would be using the Steam Runners for those really, like, you know, really dangerous deep space missions, you know, faraway colonies kind of thing. All right, so the next thing is we're going to talk about my opinion about the Nova. Okay, so I was talking to people, and they were talking about my Nova, and they weren't agreeing with my Nova. And one of the big points they brought to me was how slow the Nova was. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. So I had to go do some research, and it turned out they're absolutely correct. And I had no idea how pathetically slow the Nova was. I was kind of just looking at the fact that it has so many like phaser banks, and you know, it's pretty well defended for a small ship was my idea. You know, we don't want to lose crew out there. But there's two major things that made me think twice about this. Number one, I found out how slow it is. Okay, so the warp, so it has an LF-47 warp core, right? So that means it's capable of, you know, a standard Federation cruising speed of warp 6, which is normal, right? And then, you know, it's like emergency speed is warp 7, and its absolute max is warp 8. That is terrible. That is absolutely terrible. And then, not to mention, as far as like cargo goes, this thing is not looking so hot. So its cargo capacity is like 50. Okay, so what most people had said that they wanted was the Intrepid for what, you know, and it's designed for this, right? For deep space exploration. So it's using an LF-45 warp core system. Now, it can cruise at the standard warp 6. It has, you know, the emergency of 9.6. And then, you know, if it's pushing the absolute limits, it can go up to 9.975. So this ship is extremely fast. And it has basically the same tools and stuff that a Galaxy has, but only a smaller. You know, it's got holodecks, it's got advanced scanning. You know, it has everything. You can actually, you know, have different kinds of crew members on there and all that kind of good stuff. And the more and more I thought, it's like, okay, you're in this little tiny ship that has limited cargo space. It has no holodecks or really anything of that nature. And you're out there exploring for years on end in this little tiny pod, basically. And the more I thought about it, that probably is not the best idea. You know, you're going to need some kind of luxuries out there. You're in deep space for a long period of time exploring. And not to mention, it's too slow. The fact it's so slow, it is not an option to be doing this. It has no, there's no reason for that ship. That ship is designed and only for short range, like medical supplies and back and forth internal systems. It was a terrible choice on my part. I did not pay attention to the stats on it, and I made a big mistake. I was too focused on the weaponry and the shielding because it's a newer ship and its size. I didn't really think about the crew, and then obviously the cargo and supplies. I didn't really think too much about that because, well, what happens if you get shot or something happens and you're so small, you have so little in supplies, like something goes wrong and you run out, you're in a lot of trouble. So yeah, I made a big mistake with the Nova, and I want to let you guys know. All you guys who told me, yeah, Nova's not a great idea, and you gave me those things, yeah, you're right. So another common theme that I saw a lot of is people were telling me that they would not just build like lots of Akiras, you know, because I was using the Akira as my main, you know, attack ship. They were saying that they would like to have Norways in there. And the main reason they want Norways in the fleet is they're saying because of the Lance Phaser. And, you know, they're saying that torpedoes are not as efficient against shielding, which is true. And they're saying they wanted the Norway there. And then also the Norway would be really good at taking out, you know, large structures. And I started thinking about it, and I was like, okay, building a Norway and then building an Akira, there's not that big of a difference. Right? You get a lot more firepower with the Akira by far. But the versatility of having a Lance Phaser on the battlefield, especially when you're dealing with like really large ships or stations, as I think about it, I think that there's merits for that. And so I think I would not build that many, maybe just a few of them in the fleet, because I don't really think they're going to be that vital. But I do see the merits of the idea. So I would go ahead and change my fleet logistics a little bit, and it would look more like this. So, you know, I really do think that having those big capital class starships, you know, being upgraded, and then, you know, I really think that the Akira is very strong. And then I would have, you know, some of those Norways there. I still would build like quite a few Sabres, and then I would have some of my Sabre production would be reduced, and we'd have steam runners in there, which, you know, can take a lot of firepower. And then you're probably wondering, why on earth do you see an Excelsior class starship in my new fleet? I will explain that, but you'll have to wait till the end, because this is the most shocking one. Alright, so an obvious ship that people are constantly talking about, it's like, well, I want to build Defiance. I want to build Defiance. And I'll just say right now, if you have a station or you have, you know, good logistics, this ship is perfect. It's fast, it's maneuverable, it's got a lot of firepower, doesn't take a lot of crew, it's got a blaze of armor. I mean, it's got everything you need. But there's one fatal flaw. And we know this because when you think about the ships that we've seen, the USS Defiant and the Valkyrie, right? What was the problem with the Valkyrie? What was the problem with the Defiant? What was happening? They could not get the ship to perform right. Do you remember that? How they talked about they couldn't get past Warp 3, and they had Nog was saying, oh, well, you know, Chief O'Brien bypassed all these systems. And they're like, well, that's not a good idea. That's not right. He's like, oh, no, well, we had to do it, and it worked fine, da-da-da-da. That's not good. Having to bypass safety systems just to make your ship operational is a terrible, terrible idea. But if you got to do it, you got to do it. So that's the kind of issue with the Defiant that you're going to run into that's not good. It needs a lot of logistics support. It needs lots of maintenance. Think of the Defiant as like SR-71. You know, super advanced, state-of-the-art, but every time that thing went up, it needed to come back down, and it needed to be maintained. You know, you have to, having so much power in a small package comes at a price. And that price is that there's a lot of wear and tear and stress on the opponent or the components of the ship. So long distance fighting, this ship's not a great idea. If you have like a station and structure logistics built around to be able to supply, and you have the staff that can maintain those ships, fantastic. But my idea is we need something that can go out there in deep space, defend our borders, and not need logistics support a lot. And this ship is not that ship. This ship can't do that. And so
I just want to let you guys know, that's why I would not mass produce the Defiant. I don't even think I'd really even build the Defiant because of that reason. You know, its tactical abilities are high, but it's very expensive. And when I say expensive, I'm talking about maintenance and time. All right, and so here's one that someone suggested to me, that they would go ahead and be like the Lakota, and they would do the maintenance that they did on the Lakota. You know how they brought it up to specifications and it fought the Defiant, right? Do you guys remember that? So they were telling me that they would spend the time to upgrade the Excelsior fleet to be like the Lakota. And I just thought to myself that that's ridiculous. Why on earth would you do that? Okay, so you have 10 to 16 phasers, 2 to 4 torpedo banks, and the shields on a standard Excelsior class are between 390,000 to 585 on a newer variant. So those are the ships that we're going to be modifying and changing. So if we take a look at what they're suggesting, the Lakota, right, the ship that fought the Defiant, I'm going to compare it to a standard non-Dominion Galaxy class. So Enterprise D, Captain Picard, right? So and it has an attack value of 2,210,000. Shields are 1,668,000. The hull value is 880,000. The defense is 2,548,000. Now look at a Galaxy class. Galaxy class's firepower is 1,560,000. Its shields are 1,755,000. Its hull value is 1,191,000. Full defense of 2,946,000. So you can see that the Lakota, it's got actually more firepower because it's using quantum torpedoes instead of standard torpedoes, as far as, you know, points per value. And the hull is a good hull for a ship of its size. It is, right off the bat, a stronger hull than the Galaxy when you compare the actual mass, right? It's got a higher armor rating. Its shields are slightly weaker. I don't know why it is. I don't know why they're not the same as the Galaxy, but that is what it is. So when I look at this from a logistics standpoint, okay, from a stats point, this ship is operating very similar to a Galaxy class as far as operational, a standard Galaxy class, okay? So now let's look at this. So you could produce 2 ships in 1 year because it takes 6 months to modify this ship. After modifications, it is slightly stronger than a USS Defiant, the original USS Defiant. And we know that because they told us. This ship could have destroyed the Defiant, and if you guys don't believe me, I will show you the episode right now.
Commander, we're being hailed by the Lakota. They're ordering us to drop out of warp and prepare to be boarded.
They raised their shields and powered up their phasers. Looks like they won't take no for an answer. The Lakota's targeting their weapons on our warp engines.
They're bluffing. That's a Federation ship. They're not going to fire on us.
I hope you're right about that, Chief.
Continue on course.
We're in weapons range.
Raise shields. Damage report.
Port shields are at 60%.
Someone's been upgrading the Lakota's weapons. That's a lot of firepower for an Excelsior-class ship.
Can we cloak?
We would have to lower shields.
I wouldn't advise it.
Do we make a run for it?
If they've been tinkering with the weapons, who knows what they've done to the warp drive.
Admiral, we're receiving a message from the Lakota.
Put it through.
We've been unable to stop the Defiant. Someone has equipped her with ablative armor and neglected to inform Starfleet operations.
Under no circumstances is that ship to reach Earth. The Lakota's carrying quantum torpedoes, isn't she?
Yes, sir.
Then use them.
Admiral. My orders were to disable the Defiant, not destroy her.
Your orders are to keep the Defiant from reaching Earth by any means necessary. Is that understood?
Yes, it is.
All right. So as you can see, we know that the Lakota is slightly stronger than the USS Defiant. Not by a lot, but just enough. So it could have destroyed the Defiant. It chose not to. So with that being said, we know that the modifications, the 6 months that it takes to modify an Excelsior class ship, is superior than building a Defiant, which would take 1 year. So let's talk about these modifications. So that means you could produce 78 ships. So these 78 starships would have basically be almost 78 Defiants. Or you could produce 39 Kiras with 78 standard Excelsior class ships. So you could choose 78 basically Defiants or 39 Akiras supported by low-end Excelsiors. Okay, so this is the first time I'm seeing these stats, so we'll kind of look at them together. So if I was doing this and I did the Lakotas, and I would have, I'm just going to compare the Akira. So one Akira does have less firepower than 2 Lakotas. And so obviously it has almost twice the shielding. Let's look at hull value. So it would lose in hull value to the one Akira. And so if you look at the overall defense, so it's 4,875,000. So it'd be around 5 million in defense. So technically, from a defensive standpoint, because of the shielding, 2 Lakotas would be superior than an Akira. So now we got to think about, okay, so if I was to choose to do this instead of building my Akira fleet, what am I looking at? It wouldn't be better because number one, it's almost even between 2 Lakotas and 1 Akira. Now, if you have an Akira that's supported by 2 old-style Excelsiors, then that would obviously beat 2 Lakotas. So, as far as a defensive, I guess, perspective, this is not going to work. The Akira's is better. Okay, so originally it wasn't being compared to the Akira fleet, it's being compared to my Saber fleet. So let's figure out how powerful the actual fleet would be. So at 78 ships modified over 1 year, because you do 2 per year, that's an attack value of 172,380,000. So now let's take in consideration the defenses. So the fleet defensive capability would be 198,744,000. So now we have the understanding of the logistics of the 78 modified Excelsior class Lakota upgrades. Let's compare them to my fleet. So my fleet of 39 Sabres would have an attack value of 28,548,000 with a defense of 60,709,974. So my 39 Sabres cannot compete anywhere close to the opposing fleet of Lakotas. They're severely outgunning us. But we also have to take consideration that I would still be supported by 78 standard Excelsior class starships. So if I add that into the mix, that fleet is 28,000 or 28,080,000. Has a defensive value of 114,270,000. So right off the bat, when I look at these, I can tell that obviously the Lakota fleet is actually superior than my fleet. So if you're in a situation where you're going to be building your first fleet and you're repairing after the Dominion War, after reviewing this person's theory, I think that their Lakota upgrade theory is better than my original Saber idea, though I would do my Saber idea, but I would do it later. And then this is the reasoning for it. Okay, so the exact specifications for the Lakota. is it took 6 months to build this. So you can typically build a starship in 1 year. So even something as large as a nebula could be produced within 1 year. Now, so that means my shipping yards are not producing new ships, and I'm just modifying the ones that are there. So you could do 2 Lakota modifications on an Excelsior in a 1 year period. So that would put a strain in the very beginning on your supplies, because then you're already short on ships, and then you're also going to be down 39 ships, because that's the max amount of ships that we hear that Starfleet can produce. Now, the number could be less than this, but they're saying that you could build 39 ships. And we know that from Star Trek, when Picard was captured by the Borg, and then the Borg, they got him back, and then I forgot the woman's name, but she was the one that was the blonde, and at the very end of the episode, you get Picard back, she said that, she's in charge of rebuilding the fleet, and she said that she could get the fleet back up in 1 year. So she could replace all those ships in 1 year. So we're going off that information about our construction process. Now, with that being said, we do know that during the Dominion War that they were not fully building starships. They were only like partially building them with just weapons, shields, and engines, and then nothing else. And they were mass producing ships that way. But there's no actual data on how long it takes to build A and B and C, so I can't really use that. So that's why I'm using this. I'm aware of that situation, but I don't have any way of, figuring out that data table. There's nothing I'm aware of that's out there that says the exact time. If you guys know, you can put it in the comments. Okay, so now we have an understanding of the logistics of how we're upgrading a ship, how long it takes, and what would happen. So what I would do is I would, obviously, for each 6 months, we would have, issues with supplies. But the ships that came out are operating at a Galaxy class. So it's like almost as if I built a bunch of Galaxies, right? Because we saw that earlier. So I think from a logistics standpoint, I wouldn't have to worry about these ships being destroyed or losing the crew, which was my primary concern why I was using the Saber. But they are operating far superior than a Saber class. And I'll be honest, I didn't really kind of believe this. And then when I researched what they said, I was like, oh, wow, okay, so this is a much better plan. So I would scrap my building Sabers as the first ship. I would do these upgrades, and then I would move on to my Akiras. I would get that going with a couple steam runners, and then my original plan of building sovereigns. Okay, so let's look at how this would change my logistics. So my first thing I would do is obviously I would be repairing all those or upgrading all those Excelsiors. And then those would be my supply chain, right? So my first generation of starship building would be all upgrades. Once that's done, then my logistics situation is taken care of. Because then, I have all those Excelsiors that can handle their own, and Excelsiors do a large amount of cargo. Their cargo capacity is equivalent to, or if not better, than a steam runner. Minus its steam runners, if you took apart they're shuttle bays. But anyways, so Excelsiors are going to be built. Then my next generation is I'm going to build the Akiras, right? So my 39 ships, I'll be building Akiras and some Norways and some steam runners, right? And then, my next thing I do is fixing the nebulas and galaxies and ambassadors. If any of those things were not upgraded during the war already, I would then get them up to full specifications. And then my last generation where I was building those sovereigns, which I told you I'm not going to be doing, I would then build my Saber fleet. So my Saber fleet would then be the last thing that I build instead of the first thing, because I still think that you need small attack ships. Now, I guess I didn't add this into my fleet logistics just because I don't really think it's really that great of an idea. But once I had built the Sabres, right? Because my Sabres can go into deep space, they can support the fleets. Every ship here is deep space capable. If I needed to bust up some defenses, I guess I would build some Defiant fleets, but they would only be defending installations like Deep Space Nine or Space Station. I would never build them for long distance or use them because of their logistics issues. But even then, I'm kind of hesitant to build them because they do just, I don't know, they just don't seem to operate that well as far as the whole breaking down and having a hard time. I mean, I guess if you were able to fix all those issues, which they never did, then I guess I would use the Defiant, but in its current state, I think it's a design flaw, honestly. All right, with that being said, I want to thank everybody who put comments. I tried to read all of them. I went through them. I am very grateful to all the support and all the ideas. This was super fun. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And with that being said, this is the end of the Dominion War Aftermath 2. All the fixes that you guys came up with, and I appreciate them. And you know what? It's awesome talking to other Trekkies because nobody knows everything, and obviously I don't.
If you like this content, please subscribe and tell your friends. If you're a fan of Star Trek, make a comment. It makes a difference. With that being said, thank you all for watching Trek Wars.